Okay, we're talking underrated 2000s guys here. If you've seen the underrated guys of the 70s, 80s, or 90s videos, then you know what to expect here. First, I'm going to compare these underrated guys to some underrated movies from the decade. For this one, I've got two movies that owe a huge debt to one of my all-time favorites, Rear Window. These are two very different riffs on Hitchcock's classic. One is a gritty and emotional foreign film, while the other is pure high-concept Hollywood. The first is the French film Read My Lips from 2001. Terrible title for an American audience because it immediately puts this in your head.
Read my lips.
No new taxes.
But it probably works better in French. It's directed by Jacques Audiard, who I generally like, but he did unfortunately step in it big time with his most recent film, Amelia Perez.
Man to woman.
From penis to vagina.
Ugh. The movie might have been good without the cringeworthy musical numbers. Anyway, Read My Lips follows Carla, a lonely deaf woman, overworked at her receptionist job to the point where she's allowed to hire an assistant. Although it's clearly a bad idea, she chooses the ex-con trying to make good, played by Vincent Cassel. Eventually, his criminal past catches up with him, and he desperately hatches a scheme to rob some gangsters with the help of Carla's lip-reading skills. Maybe it was more renowned in France, but it definitely has flown under the radar in the US to the point where it's pretty hard to find on streaming. These underrated guys are definitely not as under the radar as that. You know all these guys. So maybe a more appropriate comparison is Tony Scott's Déjà Vu. This did fairly well at the box office, but got mostly bad reviews at the time. I think the critics completely missed the boat here, like many a member of the BBWAA often does. But it's really hard to miss the boat in this movie because it blows up several times from like 800 angles, because this is Tony Scott turned all the way up to 11. This movie doesn't have a terrific legacy, but I absolutely love the high-tech sci-fi remix of Rear Window and Vertigo. Like this movie, these underrated guys deserve a critical reappraisal. Maybe you saw this film back in 2006 when it came out, but don't remember too much about it. Well, to quote a wise baseball man, it might be time for you to watch Déjà Vu all over again. So these guys' videos are generally completely vibes-based, but on these underrated guys' videos, I do use a very ham-fisted statistical methodology to put the team together. I look for the guys at each position with the most WAR during the decade who did not land in the top 10 in MVP or Cy Young voting at any point in their career, aughts or otherwise. But it's still guys, so I reserve the right to vibes veto power and will veer away from the formula if necessary. Catcher, Jason Kendall. Here's a guy who was way better than I remembered, so much so that I made an offhanded crack about him in the underrated 70s guys video when talking about Jim Sundberg. If you look at guys who played 95% or more of their games at catcher, Sundberg comes in 8th all time behind a bunch of legends and Jason Kendall. I must atone for this because Kendall was actually a very good player. I think I just remember him being not very good defensively at catcher, which when I look at his stats does kind of track. He was a good hitting but defensively mediocre catcher who had the 4th highest WAR total by catchers in the aughts. He definitely started declining pretty rapidly with the bat around 2007, but his late 90s, early aughts with the Pirates was pretty great. He was always a good on-base guy, but in his early days, he also hit for high averages. His career year was 1998 when he accumulated 5.6 WAR but didn't receive a single MVP vote. In fact, he never received an MVP vote in his career. Not saying he should have been high up on the ballot ever, but in 98, guys like Mickey Morandini, Jeremy Burnitz, Rod Beck, and Dante Bichette got some down-ballot votes. First base, Darin Erstad. Gonna go vibes here because Erstad did crack the top 10 in MVP once. This weirdly spelled Darin, I'm assuming his parents were Bobby Darin heads, was also a weird positional guy, that rare first baseman center fielder. He was mostly just an okay player, but had 2 massive years, including an utterly insane 2000, when he racked up 8.3 WAR, led the league in hits with a whopping 240, and slashed .355, .409, .541, while being an elite defensive outfielder in left and center, with a few games thrown in at first. He was second in WAR to A-Rod, but fell to 8th on the MVP ballot. Second base, Plácido Polanco. Polanco was definitely an underrated guy. If I asked you who had the most WAR for a second baseman from 2000 to 2009, would you have guessed Polanco? Well, that would be stupid because it's actually Chase Utley. But Polanco is number 2, right ahead of Jeff Kent. Polanco is perhaps most known as the guy the Phillies got in exchange for future Hall of Famer Scott Rowland. I'm not going to say Polanco was anywhere near the overall player Rowland was, but was this even a bad trade by the Phils? I'd argue it wasn't terrible. If you look at these two post-trade, Rowland posted 40.8 WAR, while Polanco had 35.3. Clearly, Rowland was the better player, but Rowland got paid $86 million, while Polanco pulled in $49 million. So $37 mil for an extra 5.5 WAR. That seems like a pretty fair deal, actually. But I'm always a bit surprised when I see Polanco's career numbers. Consistently decent average and on base, great defense, and positional versatility makes for a very valuable player. And he had a couple of big 6 WAR seasons, one in 07 with Detroit when he batted .341 and came in 17th in MVP voting. He would have been worthy of a top 10 finish that year. He also had a 6.1 WAR season in 05, a year he didn't receive any votes because of splitting leagues after a trade from Philly to Detroit. Third base, Troy Glaus. Let's stick with the category of guys who were traded for Scott Rowland and go with Troy Glaus, the 5th best third baseman by WAR in the decade. Glaus was an excellent slugger for the Angels who never received an MVP vote outside of his one single vote while playing for the Blue Jays in 06. But not exactly sure how Glaus got so glossed over in the year 2000. He ranked 4th in the AL in WAR, led the league in homers with 47, OBP'd over 400, and slugged over 600. Just a monster season, and nothing. It's some sort of East Coast bias type of thing going on here, I think, because there's no reason for this oversight. Glaus was good in new school stats, but also in old school stats and everything in between. And he was fine defensively at third. I guess those Angels games just start too late for those East Coast elites. Shortstop, Rafael Furcal. Furcal was a great defensive shortstop with a solid bat who consistently put up 4 WAR seasons and never reached higher in MVP voting than 14th, but he got snubbed in his best season, a 6.5 WAR 2005, which was much more defense-driven, which makes it understandable that he didn't receive a single vote. Recently, Furcal was charged with aggravated battery with a deadly weapon when he allegedly threw a rock at a guy in a Publix parking lot after a fender bender. Of all the infielders this side of Mason Wynn you don't want throwing a rock at you, it's Rafael Furcal. Left field, Johnny Damon. This is a weird one because it's hard to see Damon as an underrated guy when he was on so many famous teams, including, of course, the 04 Red Sox. But Damon's career numbers are a bit stronger than I expected. 56.3 WAR. I had assumed he'd be somewhere in the low 40s in WAR. He was a model of consistency, was never the best at anything, but had a very solid bat with strong plate discipline, excellent base running, and acceptable defense, playing mostly in center. This surprisingly ranks him 18th in WAR among center fielders all time, essentially tied with Hall of Famer Larry Doby. No, I'm not going to make a Johnny Damon Hall of Fame case here. Larry Doby obviously got in for historical significance in addition to having an excellent career. Don't think Damon's status as king of the idiots quite compares to Doby's legacy. And speaking of Damon, still kind of boggles the mind that no one ever made a Johnny Damon parody version of this song to use for his walk-up music. Just a real wasted opportunity there. Center field, Mike Cameron. Cameron is another guy who is perhaps most known in relation to the guy he was traded for, Ken Griffey Jr. Clearly, Cameron was nowhere near the player Griffey was, but he was indeed a better player than Griffey after this trade. Jr., of course, was decimated by injuries during his time post-Seattle, so he played in a lot fewer games than Cameron, putting up just 13.1 WAR, while Cameron lapped him with 35.3. Griffey was still a better hitter in that time, but Cameron stayed on the field and played much better defense. That trade was a massive win for the Mariners and a huge part of their record-breaking 2001 season, when Cameron would rank 9th in WAR among position players. Right field, Bobby Abreu. I'd say this guy is one of the more underrated guys of this era. Had he played the majority of his career for the Yankees or Red Sox and seen annual playoff playing time, he might have gotten more vociferous Hall of Fame consideration. Maybe that sounds ridiculous, but Abreu's numbers are really damn good. It's just that he did all that damage on the 98-2006 Phillies and no one noticed. Except Bobby's Bobbies. They definitely noticed that Abreu's terrific bat, great plate discipline, and great base running and base stealing abilities added up to a very consistently valuable player. And I'm kind of surprised to see that he's actually still hanging on the Hall of Fame ballot and moving up every year, so maybe he'll get in eventually. Hell, there are plenty of players with less impressive resumes in the Hall. DH, Adam Dunn. Dunn slots in here because I used batting runs for the DH, since we don't care about defense here. And Dunn had the most batting runs of the decade for a player who never had a top 10 MVP finish. Perhaps if he had played his whole career in the AL, DHing, his defensive liabilities wouldn't have detracted so much from his excellent bat. Starters. So as usual with these, the statistical formula sends us in the wrong direction when it comes to starting pitchers. So I'm going to switch up most of these guys. The formula gave us Soul Patch guy Doug Davis, Flower guy Ted Lilly, Initials guy AJ Burnett, cousin, nephew, and uncle guy Kelvin Escobar, and injured guy Kerry Wood. I'm going to keep Wood but drop the rest, who I think you'd have a hard time making much of an underrated case for. Kerry Wood is a weird one though, because he was such a sensation at the time, so it's hard to say he was underrated when he got so much press before injuries destroyed his career. But I have to say I was kind of shocked that he never received a single vote for Cy Young, despite him being perceived as such a dominant starter before his arm issues. His 2003 was terrific, leading the league in Ks and Ks per 9, ranking 4th in WAR with 6.1. How did he not get a single Cy Young vote? Probably had to do with his teammate Mark Pryor outperforming him, but also not winning the award, despite leading the league in WAR and posting a pristine ERA. It went to Eric Gagne instead. Gagne was unbelievably good that year, but still, only pitched 82 innings. The rest of the rotation is going to be vibes, guys, and for the first one, I'm going to go full galaxy brain and pick Mike Mussina. Yeah, I know, he's in the danged Hall of Fame. How can a Hall of Famer be underrated? Well, yeah, good point. Also, dude got Cy Young votes in 8 seasons and even MVP votes in 2. Still, I'm gonna brain genius right through this one and go with Moose. The crux of my argument is that Mussina got overlooked during his time with Baltimore, who only made the playoffs twice in Mussina's 10-year stint there. Then he came to the Yankees and was overshadowed by other aces, guys like Roger Clemens, Andy Pettitte, Kevin Brown, and Randy Johnson. I'd say that Mussina got robbed of 1, maybe 2 deserved Cy Young awards during his career. In 2001, he led the league in WAR and FIP and received just 2 vote points, while teammate Roger Clemens took home the award because of his pretty-looking 20-3 win-loss record. He also has a case for his 1992 season, his career high point. This time, Roger objectively bettered him, leading the league in pretty much everything. However, neither of them won the award or even finished in second place because Jack McDowell had a tour scheduled with the Smithereens and the Riders were hoping for some comped tickets. So he got second place, with a reliever once again getting the award. Eckersley this time. Next, I'm going to go with Javier Vasquez. This guy is maybe the ultimate aughts guy. He put up a respectable 43.4 career WAR, almost all of it in this decade. He did receive some Cy Young votes for his great 09 season for the Braves, but got snubbed in his nearly as good 03 season. Pitching for Montreal and going 13-12 will do that. Mark Buehrle. Mark Buehrle was elite at injury avoidance, and there's something to be said for that. After his rookie year in the pen, Buehrle never made fewer than 30 starts in any of the next 15 years. This ruthless consistency led him to having some surprisingly strong career numbers. He put up 60 career WAR while only getting a Cy Young vote in 05, which was his 5th best season by WAR. In 07, he was among the best in the league, but his 10-9 record for a bad White Sox team didn't do him any favors. He had a better record in 01 with a similarly great season, but still got snubbed despite having the 3rd best pitcher WAR in the AL. Brad Radke. Radke was an extreme walk-avoidant pitcher for the Twins for 12 solid seasons. He had a 20-win season in 97, which garnered him 3rd place in Cy Young voting despite just a decent 4.6 WAR total. Radke's best years were straddling the millennium in 99 and 2000. I have a hard time making an underrated case for the 2000 season because the dude had a 4.45 ERA, which, come on, right? But of course, this was at the height of the steroid era when basically no one had a sub-4 ERA except Pedro, who was the pitching equivalent of Babe Ruth in 1920 that year, just playing a different game than anyone around him. Looking at fielding independent pitching, Radke's seemingly bad 4.18 ranked him 8th in the league. And his second to Pedro 6.2 WAR likely had a lot to do with the fact that he played in front of a god-awful defense, which WAR adjusts for. So I suppose I would say he was underrated as his old school stats were ugly with a 12-16 record and the 4.45 ERA, but adjusting for era and defense, he was probably a lot more valuable than people realized at the time. His 99 is more of a snub, as he was second to Pedro again with 6.6 WAR and fourth in ERA at a respectable 3.75. But once again, he was done in by a 12-14 record for a weak fielding and league worst offensive team. Bullpen. Once again, I'm going to try to rush through this bullpen because I think it's fairly tough for a reliever to be underrated. Francisco Cordero. I always get confused between this guy and the other Cordero closer, Chad, who played around the same time. But this guy was the superior Cordero. Had one really lights out season in 04 for Texas that did actually get him some MVP votes, but no Cy Young votes. LaTroy Hawkins. LaTroy Hawkins was a very solid reliever over the course of a 21-year career. In addition to being an all-time name guy, he also became a Godfather guy when his teammate on the 95 Twins asked him to be Godfather to his son. Jonathan Papelbon. God damn it. Gonna have to admit that one of the most publicity-generating and unlikable closers this side of John Rocker was weirdly underrated. He was really tremendous for the Red Sox and was still good for several years for the Phillies before being traded to the Nationals mid-season in 2015 and immediately assaulting the best player in the league. But his 2006 is bonkers. 5 WAR in 68.1 relief innings. I would say that this is the best relief season in the modern closer era. He gave up just 3 homers, walked only 11 unintentionally, and struck out 75 with a .92 ERA. It's the highest WAR in a season ever for anyone with less than 100 innings pitched. And he didn't get a single Cy Young vote. Now, normally I'm against relievers getting any Cy Young consideration, but since the voters seem to love voting for relievers, why didn't they vote for this, the best season of its kind? This, even though K-Rod and Joe Nathan both got votes that year as closers. And 2006 was before any Irish jigs or teammate attacks, so I don't think he had the D-bag reputation yet. So I don't know. I guess something just gave voters the ick. Octavio Dotel. May he rest in peace. Octavio Dotel had some amazing seasons early in his career with the Astros, including a massive 4.2 WAR season in 2002. This was as a setup man to Billy Wagner though, so he didn't have the saves to get onto anyone's Cy Young ballot. Dotel fell off pretty quickly as his platoon splits became more extreme as years passed. By the end of the aughts, he was putting up insane splits like this. Tony La Russa would take note of this and turn Dotel into a rare Roogie in 2011. Dude was insane against righties that season, and La Russa limited his exposure to lefties. Then we'll round out the bullpen with 2 guys I've got nothing to say about. David Weathers and the rare 1T Scott Shields. Bench. Catcher. Russell Martin. The formula gave me a bunch of catchers before I got to Russell Martin, but most of them were either guys like Jason Varitek, who got tons of press and could have an overrated case made for him, or guys like Ramon Hernandez, Paul Loduca, and AJ Pierzynski, who were good but never all that good. But I think you can make a case for Russell Martin being underrated. He has the 4th most WAR for a catcher since the millennium after Mauer, Posey, and Molina. And he had a couple of seasons in 2007 and 2014 that maybe should have gotten him more MVP consideration. In 2014, he did land 13th, but in 07, he got totally snubbed despite a great offensive and defensive season where he won the Gold Glove and the Silver Slugger. Outfield, Brian Giles. Going vibes here for Giles, who did crack the top 10 in MVP voting in 2005, his 5th best season. In 99 and 2000, Giles tied for 4th and then 5th in WAR among position players, but came in 19th in MVP voting in both years. Giles is also an interesting case when considering his Hall of Fame credentials. Clearly, he doesn't have the stats for the Hall, but Giles was the victim of coming up in the stacked 1990s Cleveland Indians system. There was no room for him with Manny Ramirez, Albert Bell, and Kenny Lofton in that outfield, so Giles got stuck down in AAA, absolutely raking for years before finally getting a regular but part-time role in 1997, his age 26 season. He wouldn't become a full-time starter until he got dealt to the Pirates in 99, his age 28 season. This guy lost out on years of his MLB career, and it's not like he wasn't ready for the bigs. He slashed .284, .391, .485 in his 4 partial seasons in Cleveland. Dude was absolutely ready for the majors by 1994. If not for that delay to his career, he could easily be over 60 WAR and be a legit Hall of Fame candidate. Outfield, Grady Sizemore. Despite having the dopiest looking photo on Baseball Reference, this guy was phenomenal for 4 seasons before injuries derailed his career. He came in 11th in the MVP in 06, even though he led the league in WAR, as well as doubles and runs scored. Third base, Eric Chavez. Chavez got some down-ballot MVP love from 2002 to 2005, but was snubbed on his best year, his top 10 WAR 2001. Second base, Brian Roberts. It was a bit of an outlier season, but Roberts' 2005 was enormous. While it did land him 18th in MVP voting, Roberts was actually number 2 in WAR that year. Second base, Orlando Hudson. This guy never received a single MVP vote despite having a few seasons that could have gotten some consideration, especially his 5.2 WAR 2004. Shortstop, Edgar Renteria. And we need a shortstop backup, so we'll go with Renteria, even though I don't think he's all that underrated. Pretty fairly rated, this guy. All right, there you go. That's our underrated aughts guys roster. Please like and subscribe, and as always, let us know who we missed.
You